Oops, as of right
Sorry,
now,
sorry about that.
that's all right. It is due at the end of this calendar year. The agency right now is putting together an interdisciplinary team that will be part of this working group to develop this plan. So we'll have someone from park operations on this team. There'll be fire representation. There'll be natural resource representation. There'll be forestry representation to help develop this plan. So folks are being identified as we speak, and they'll be getting started fairly soon.
And does this take into account, you know, other draft plans that may be more disciplinary specific? And the idea being to integrate some of this material?
Yeah, that's a excellent question. There are other plans that are out there that we'll be looking to for information. It'll be a standalone plan, but we'll be drawing off information from other plans. Like there is a resource management plan for Manny Correllus. There is a fire management draft that we had put together with a consultant a couple of years ago. So we'll be drawing from a number of these sources to incorporate into this plan.
All right, that is that's that's good to hear. I'm curious, and then I'll open it up to other team members here. And we also have Karen Lombard from the Nature Conservancy. Sorry, I missed you earlier, Karen. Um, are there comparable plans for, you know, your other reserves or other land holdings throughout the Commonwealth?
Yeah, so we've just completed a draft, and when I say we, this is the big we. This is the DCR with it's folks that have been involved with DCR over the years. Um, Large organization with a lot of moving parts in terms of who handles what. So while I'm responsible for the forestry and fire aspects, we have a natural resource office, we have cultural resources office, we have park operations. Um, a plan was developed for natural heritage for Miles Standish State Forest, which has a lot of similarities to Manny Correllus. So that I believe is in draft status. Our natural resource office has been working on that, and that has elements that we will be looking to at least from a template model, looking to use as a resource.
And if that document is public facing, or when it becomes publicly available, you know, if that could be shared with us, or, you know, a link, I think that would just, that might be able to help set some expectations of, you know, just how comprehensive or what this. I was as happy to see that it does include operations as well. Like it gets into, drills down into some of the bike path stuff, the frisbee golf, in addition to the habitat component and the, you know, the wildfire mitigation elements. So it does seem to be, you know, a big tent. It's a
Yeah,
lot of different pieces gonna fit beneath there.
absolutely. Yeah, that's our expectation as well. On it's going to be all inclusive in terms of. And again, I keep calling it. It's an operations and maintenance plan. How we manage Manning Crowley State Forest, and from a wide array of disciplines.
Do any of our members of our team from the island or the region have any questions related to the plan? How we might be involved? How we might get involved? Ben, we're going to take things as we usually do. We'll save the public comments for the end.
I thought, just a quick question for Peter, just to outline how the public is going to be involved in this plan before we move on to this topic. Maybe you can just spell that out.
Yeah, good question, Ben. There will be a public component of it. Still working on the details on how that's going to translate, but expectation is the plan will get written spring, early summer, and then depending on timing, there will be some sort of public facing part to it.
Karen.
Yeah, I was wondering if there would be a way for, so particularly for the habitat management piece where there is some expertise on this working group to be involved earlier in the process rather than in the final review somehow. Just so that if we have some thoughts, we don't have to backtrack. I don't know. Just a thought.
Excellent question, Karen. I will check in on the answer for that. I don't have one immediately right now, but certainly I know that there's a wealth of experience out there, and I will check in on that.
It's good to know that it's happening, and I think if there's even a kind of tentative timeline that can be shared when you guys get to that stage, that would, I guess, involve the public involvement or public, engagement piece as well. That'll be great to just be able to share with folks, because I get questions sometimes, about the timing of it, and all I really know is the end of 2026. So it sounds like it's going to be a busy year. Already underway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll be developing that timeline once we get the internal working group together.
All right.
We'll have a little better idea on the timing of things.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks for unpacking that. And unless there are other questions, I'm gonna turn it over to Pat Farrar from the Woodwell Climate Research Center. Pat studies the dynamics of carbon storage and plant diversity in response to climate change, human development, and restoration efforts, over time. And he focuses on forests, grasslands, shrublands on Martha's Vineyard, and retired cranberry bogs throughout southeastern Mass, amongst other things that I'm aware that he does. Pat, thanks for joining us this morning, and we thought it'd be a good opportunity to educate us a little bit more on some of the plant diversity efforts and analyses that you've been involved with and that Woodwell has been tracking inside Manuel Correllus. I'll make you a co-host here so you have the ability to share your screen.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me.
Should be all set.
Okay, great. How does that look for everybody?
Excellent.
Colorful.
All right, great. All right, so, yep, I'm Patrick Farrar. Pat, I'm a research assistant at the Woodwell Climate Research Center. And today I'm going to be talking with you a bit about some of the plant biodiversity in Correllus. So, I want to start off just by talking about plant biodiversity in New England a little more generally. So a lot of diversity occurs in patch habitats that don't necessarily occupy large areas of the landscape, but they have disproportionate numbers of rare species. So maintaining these patch habitats is really critical for sustaining regional biodiversity. And this idea is really nicely encapsulated in this 2021 report by the Native Plant Trust and the Nature Conservancy, pictured on the right there. So many of these patch habitats are early successional ecosystems. They're created and maintained by disturbances like fire, mowing, grazing. In our region, disturbance of the forest ecosystems that would predominate in the absence of disturbance. So because these habitats are early successional, they have lower stocks of carbon in their above ground vegetation than later successional habitats like, say, mature forests. Large trees and other woody vegetation stores a lot of carbon in the wood. So this creates a trade-off between promoting regional biodiversity and maximizing carbon storage everywhere. So kind of circle back to that later. But Correllus is one such example of a high biodiversity patch habitat. It contains a few hundred acres of more open grasslands and heathlands, primarily in the form of fire breaks that I'll discuss shortly. As far as plant biodiversity is concerned, these are really the hotspots in Correllus, so that's going to be more of my focus today. But the vast contiguous areas of scrub oak and oak pitch pine barrens, which are a globally rare habitat type, are extremely important for animal biodiversity, especially insects, as I understand Matt Pelican is going to discuss in much greater depth soon. So the state forest contains this network of fire breaks, as you can see in forming a grid in the aerial imagery of part of the forest on the right there. So these are wide paths that are maintained by mowing and brush cutting, et cetera, to serve as open areas that would hopefully prevent a wildfire from spreading out of control within the forest and allow for fire trucks and equipment to get around within the forest. The Correllus and the fire breaks within are very important for plant biodiversity regionally. Margaret Curtin, who's a renowned naturalist on Martha's Vineyard, has compiled a list of 294 plant species found within the state forest. And the Biodiversity Works and Friends of Correllus iNaturalist project for the state forest has photo submissions of 322 different plant species there. And according to the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, Correllus has one of the highest concentrations of state-listed rare species in the Commonwealth. So, as I mentioned earlier, as far as plant diversity is concerned, the fire breaks are really the heavy hitters. Mowing and removal or brush cutting of the woody vegetation there to maintain the fire breaks has created a disturbance regime and open habitat that supports really high plant biodiversity. And it creates refugia for many rare plants, such as the endangered species pictured on the right here. The Margaret's plant species list included 23 rare species, 22 of which occur in the fire breaks and other open areas. And a team led by Mike Whittemore, who used to steward the Nature Conservancy's properties on the vineyard, recently analyzed the floras of 64 sandplain grassland and heathland sites from Long Island to Maine. And they identified that the fire breaks alone in Correllus contain 30 rare plant species and have the second highest floristic quality index of any of their study sites, which basically indicates that they have a very high concentration of specialized rare species. So zooming out from Correllus for a moment, there are widespread concerns about declining biodiversity more generally. And so my supervisor, senior scientist Chris Neal at the Woodwell Climate Research Center, jumped on an opportunity to study plant biodiversity change across Martha's Vineyard. In 2022, my colleague Julia Charest and I, on the left there, resurveyed about 100 large vegetation plots around Martha's Vineyard in lots of different habitat types in forests, scrub oak barrens, other shrublands, grasslands, and coastal habitats that were part of a large regional survey done by the Harvard Forest back in the year 2000. So they were initially surveyed in 2000 and we resurveyed them in 2022. And 25 of those vegetation plots were in the forests and scrub oak barrens of Correllus. And here's something that we found. Island-wide, across all these different habitat types, plant diversity declined from 2000 to 2022. So the S on the y-axis of this graph here is just the mean amount of different plant species that we found in our plots in these different habitat types. So the trend is that these are decreasing from 2000 to 2022. We're losing plant diversity. And so the causes of these declines are not exactly clear, but given the very high density of white-tailed deer on the island and existing studies about deer impacts on plant biodiversity, I want to suggest that it's possible that deer could have something to do with these losses. I'll also point out that grasslands had the highest species richness of any habitat type in both years, and were the only habitat that actually did not have a statistically significant decrease in their species richness over that time frame. So that would likely be because these grasslands are early successional patch habitats that are intentionally managed with disturbance for biodiversity by conservation organizations. So this summer, Chris and I were contracted by the Nature Conservancy to establish new vegetation monitoring plots or resurvey existing ones at 4 grassland sites and 1 scrub oak site on Martha's Vineyard that the Nature Conservancy owns and or manages. And this figure on the left, this figure on the left shows how plant biodiversity is being sustained over time at the 2 grassland sites with historical vegetation data going back to the late 90s or early 2000s. These are sites that have been mowed, intentionally burned, brush cut, and treated for non-native invasive species over that time frame. And the take-home message here is that this work pays off as far as plant biodiversity is concerned. So I want to link back to the biodiversity carbon trade-off that I brought up in the beginning. The fire breaks in Correllus total about 300 of the 5,300 acres or so, about 6% of the area. If the goal was to maximize carbon storage in Correllus, we might imagine a scenario in which all the fire breaks grow up to be mature oak pine woodlands. I mean, I know from a fire risk mitigation standpoint, that wouldn't be practical, but leaving that aside for a second, this scenario would increase the carbon stock of the island's oak pine woodlands by 1 or 2%. Meanwhile, all the rare plants that occur in the fire breaks and rarely, if ever, in the other areas of Correllus would likely be lost or at least substantially decline. So I wish to illustrate the point that it's worthwhile to consider the magnitude of the biodiversity and carbon in question when weighing these types of trade-offs in management. So wrapping up, we know that the fire breaks in Correllus harbor extraordinary plant biodiversity, including many rare and specialized species of conservation concern. We know that managing open habitats with disturbance is doing a pretty good job of sustaining plant diversity elsewhere on the island. And we know that monitoring vegetation plots on the island over time can provide a wealth of information about how plant communities and diversity are changing. So it would be great to have permanently marked vegetation plots in these fire breaks to add them to the existing network of vegetation plots on the island, establish a rigorous scientific baseline understanding of these plant communities, and create a path forward for monitoring their health over time. it would also be great to consider creating some deer exclosure experiments in Correllus or elsewhere on the island so that deer impacts on plant communities can be explicitly and rigorously tested there. And lastly, I would like to say that there's really great human community engagement with biodiversity going on in Correllus with things like the iNaturalist project and BioBlitzes and forest walks. So clearly the community is really invested in the forest, which is wonderful. And these efforts are really valuable and it'd be great for them to continue. So with that, I can leave it there and I'm happy to take questions or comments, and there's my contact information.
Thank you, Pat. That was great.
Sure thing.
For starters, I'll open it up to the team and DCR if there are any questions for you.
Dan, am I on or not? Bob Woodruff.
You're on, Bob. Go for it.
Hey, Pat, it's good to see you, and thank you ever so much. The Friends of Correllus, having been the agency or part of the whole picture here that got the grant from Edie to do your work in the forest. We're just delighted that there it is. Is there anything we can get as a small report, Pat? That would be very helpful in our enlightenment of the community about what you just presented.
Sure. So which information exactly?
Well, I think a sort of popular piece of writing, which is what you just presented, kind of, with a little more science than maybe the average person in the street wants to hear. But however we can convey to anything you can do that would help us convey to the public and through our handouts, press releases, etc., and our work in the field, of course, but just how extraordinarily diverse the forest is and how much it is dependent on disturbance. Anything that'll help us further that.
Sure. Well, so really the work that I have done in Correllus was in the scrub oak barrens and the forests. So I have not personally surveyed in the fire breaks, but I compiled a lot of great information that from people who have spent extensive time looking at plants in the fire breaks of Correllus. So I'm certainly happy to talk about it and get Chris Neal involved as well, and we should discuss that.
Yeah. One other question, Dan, if I might, for Pat, and that is, for years I've thought of doing study plots in the midst, if you will, of the scrub oak habitat or other habitats in the forest, but off of the fire lanes per se. And we know that the fire lanes are so extraordinarily successful in the diversity because they do not have the competition of the other plants around them, and they have the light and the this and that, and they've been mowed, or not burnt, but mowed repeatedly for 100 years, roughly. So they've been very well managed, and look at the results of that. So my thought for years has been, let's go out into the scrub oak or into other habitats and create monitoring plots that are managed, not just monitored, I'm sorry, but management plots that are also monitored to see if we can create the same kind of diversity in the scrub oaks. It just sort of is trying to prove my theory that the whole darn place once looked not exactly like the fire lanes, but it had an extraordinary diversity in my view. And if it was managed by indigenous fire, yay, that would be part of the whole thing. So that's just a thought that I have, and I wondered what, from the science standpoint, how that shakes out with you.
Sure. I mean, more experimentation and more vegetation monitoring plots, I'm never going to say no to. I think it's always a good idea to have more information available and more things explicitly studied. So again, happy to talk about that. I will say one thing is that permanently marking plots in really dense scrub oak poses some logistical challenges that would have to be addressed. It's a lot easier to find permanent plot markers in a much more open habitat than it is, even when I was going back to resurvey the Harvard Forest Survey plots from 2000, even just getting to a certain GPS point in the midst of that scrub oak is pretty challenging.
Yeah.
It can be overhead high and really dense in there. So, there would be some logistical things to consider, but I'm sure we could figure something out. Karen, hi.
Yeah, Pat did reference the one site, which we call the medicine lots, that is mowed scrub oak. And it's we just mowed it a few years ago for the first time, obviously, in a long time. And so that, I think it's sort of an outstanding question of whether the plant diversity is going to increase in there through the management that we're now doing. And so, that would be interesting to get at, I don't know, Pat, if you, when those breaks were started in the state forest relative, and how long it might have taken for grassland species to migrate into those is sort of an interesting question. And then I just also wanted to say that I think we should recognize, if we think about the larger context of the island and sea level rise, that a lot of our grasslands that we're managing are close to the ocean, and we're going to start to lose pieces of those. And so the fire breaks are going to be increasingly important for grassland species on the vineyard.
Matt. Sorry, can I piggyback off that for 1 second?
Yeah.
So we set up these monitoring plots in the medicine lots, which are this mowed scrub oak area, in 2024. So we monitored them in 2024 and 25. But like Karen was saying, it kind of remains to be seen. More time needs to pass, I'm sure, for management effects on the plant diversity to really be noticeable.
Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, in response to Karen's comments and question, would it be possible, Pat, for you to go back to the slide in your presentation that showed resampling results from Catema and sampling results from the Mazar property?
Yep.
Matt, where is the Mazar property?
It's at the head of Kanamika Cove on the Edgartown Great Pond, so it's off of Meeting House Way. The Catema sites, you see level diversity curve, and in the Mazar sites in green, you see increases. And I just point out that the formal management of the Catema airfield began in 1986, and it basically continued management that had been being done informally for decades or possibly even centuries. So it makes sense that reflects a sort of steady state. The Mazar property was the result of, was conserved as sort of an offspring of a proposal for a golf course in that area back around the year 2000. I don't remember specifically the date, but most of that grassland restoration there was oak woodland at that point. So it is a relatively recent restoration site where the management regime changed in contrast to what happened at Catema. So it's interesting to me that the Mazar site shows, in response to that restoration, an increase in diversity. Whether those things are coming from the seed bank or coming from elsewhere, as you know, the propagation sources off-site, is impossible to tell, and one could only speculate. But it's clear that for at least a quarter century, there can be increases in diversity in response to this kind of management regime and restoration of early successional habitat. So in terms of the medicine lots, Karen, hang tight, give it 25 years and talk to me then. It's a little bit of a different situation. I think the scrub oak that was mowed at the medicine lots was really dense and really uniform, and there wasn't much in the way of herbaceous patches inside there, although there were some. And I think the woodland at Mazar was a little bit more varied, had a little bit more like Pennsylvania sedge patches and so on that were. But I do think that this kind of restoration thing can, whether it's from seed banking or propagation from elsewhere, can take a long, long time to play out in terms of seeing the biodiversity changes. So I think this is a really great slide, Pat. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. We also, just to piggyback off of that a little bit, we also did look at, there were some native plant, native seeds and native plants planted at the site at Mazar, I think in 2003 or so, if I recall, and we actually tracked the individual species over time to see if they persisted or showed up at all or ended up making up a large proportion. The results of that are, it's not too many of the seeded or planted things really established really well over time, but there's a lot of other forb species and things that were never intentionally planted that are now showing up all over there. And yeah, it's really cool to see this. The Mazar property is this really cool mosaic of different patches and stuff. It's a cool site.
Yeah, it's been interesting following that site in terms of the invertebrate population, just watching things colonize it over time. Same kind of process that the diversity of breeding grasshoppers or breeding butterflies on the site has pretty steadily increased over the intervening years since the restoration. So really good project, and the Nature Conservancy was prescient in moving aggressively to preserve that site. The Mazar family was incredibly generous and forward-looking in cooperating with that. And then TNC and the Mazars have done a great job in managing it since the restoration. So really good example of how this can work.
Pat, can you indulge me with an elementary question that I want to ask? This is just sort of broader, but it's not, help me understand, it's not rare species for rare species sake, right? Like are these plants pollinators? Why should we care so much about these, what'd you say, 290 and change, species that are found there, and I know not too many other places, but I always ask myself that question: why should I care so much about how diminished they are? So I'll stop there because I'd like to hear from you.
Sure. It looks like Chris also wants to weigh in. I mean, right away, I think my initial response is just that, I mean, biodiversity is something that has, it's like many things in conservation or restoration, it's values based. So there's, from a kind of philosophical standpoint, just talking about biodiversity, it's like, there's something about species disappearing from the record of the planet forever, irrevocably, that I think poses ethical considerations, especially if we as humans are kind of driving a lot of those losses and extinctions, and if we could do something to prevent them. But as far as the specifics of the plants in the fire breaks in Correllus, again, I don't know personally enough about the fire breaks vegetation to weigh in about the other values of those plants, but I'm sure being a lot of them are probably flowering forb species that are work in concert with native pollinators and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's a valid question and a valid point. It's, I think, like anything about valuing, say, what your values are, I guess. Chris, would you like to comment?
Yeah, can I weigh in on that? So I think that is part of it. I do think there's an ethical question to keeping things around because they exist. But on the other hand, a lot of the species that are out there, the abundant forbs, the goldenrods especially, are very, very important pollinator plants for a whole host of insects. The other issue is that I always think about biodiversity, especially with plants, is it increases adaptive capacity and ability to respond to conditions that we don't have now but might have in the future. So these plants, some of them are not abundant now, but it's very difficult for us to predict which ones will be more abundant in a world that's going to look very different in several decades. And I think keeping that adaptive capacity in the bank by preserving species, even in relatively small patches and at small abundances, has great potential value in the future for responding to conditions that will exist, and things are changing, as everybody knows, faster than they ever have in 2 or 3 million years in terms of climate. So I always think that's part of the equation for these rare species.
Appreciate that. Do other attendees have questions? I don't want to keep Patrick hostage here. So before we move on to other agenda items, figured I'd just give a chance if other folks in attendance wanted to ask any follow-up questions about the presentation. John.
How do you keep track of the expenses, either dollars or carbon, in all of your efforts going back to the year 2000 to essentially just, certainly at the Katama sites, maintain? I'm interested in how you figure out the expense, again, either in carbon or dollar, of doing what you're doing.
Yeah, we probably don't keep track as well as we should. We could probably give a pretty good guess, though, in terms of the kinds of contracts, fire contracts, and other things it takes to manage these sites. I mean, but there's a lot of overhead and staff time, that's hard to capture. But it is, it's not, obviously it takes money, particularly right now. Fire is increasingly expensive if you have to hire contractors and things. So, but I don't have exact numbers.
Johanna. *6, I think, from the phone could get you unmuted. Going once. All right. Johanna, we're going to move on if you can't hear us.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I can hear you. It was not easy to find the unmute. Is that okay if I?
Okay. Johanna and then Ellen.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks for all the information. One of the last comments that kind of caught my ear was about, the world will look a lot different. And I agree with that, but it's also going to feel a lot different. It's going to be so much hotter. And it kind of blows my mind that, we know that trees keep a place cooler. And has that been, that's a serious impact. Like, removing all these trees is going to make the island feel hotter. And so it's not clear to me how these, rare plants are going to offset heat. And that can, I have a few other questions, but that's just one. Mostly the thing that I really have a hard time understanding, or I guess I am starting to understand, is that all of these things that took place that triggered the need for mitigation, for more cutting, actually benefited what, the people on this call seem to think is the priority, which are these rare species. So the fire lanes and then the illegal cutting by Sheriff's Meadow, these quote unquote, acts that hurt rare species actually ended up helping the rare species. So which rare species were injured during these two major projects that are, now resulting in the need to clear the forest? I mean, I see that you're doing it in phases, but ultimately you want to, the plan, it seems, is to clear all of the white pines, which are very native to the area.
No.
I mean, they may have been planted, but they're certainly native to the area. I mean, you don't have to drive 2 minutes off the ferry to see that there are white pine everywhere, and there are white pine all over the vineyard and in Katama. So I think the non-native argument is very, it's off-putting because it's very otherizing. It feels very reminiscent of what we see on a national scale with, who belongs and who doesn't. But these white pine are serving a purpose. They're serving a purpose. They're clearing the air. They're creating a cooler environment. They're protecting the water sources. So I think the non-native thing should just be put to rest. It sounds very, I hate to say it, but it just sounds very ignorant, in my opinion. So where is the list of what non-native or what species are rare in the forest? And I've seen the list that supports the rare species that you're hoping to support and bring back, but where's the comprehensive list? Because the forest isn't even on MACRIS, on the Massachusetts Cultural Resource Inventory. It's never been inventoried formally by the state.
And can we stop there as far as the questions go? Because I want to make sure that we have time to cover the other agenda items. I think you've got a few unpacked there. Can we give
well, if you could answer the question
Woodwell
first.
a chance to respond?
Sure.
Well, I think a lot of pieces of that are sort of beyond the scope of what I was discussing here, and that I don't know that I would be the best person to weigh in on some of those things. I was mostly just focusing on the plant diversity element. Chris, would you like to say something?
I was just going to say, I don't really know the answer to that question in terms of what that original. Karen, do you know what that original mitigation order was for?
It might have been for the harrowing, right? Initially, was there some harrowing associated? That's my recollection, Matt or Tom.
Yeah, it was
Matt,
conversion mainly of scrub oak, so it was moth habitat primarily, and the harrowing along the northern and western boundary of the state forest. So it was primarily scrub oak habitat, and there may also have been a number of rare plants involved, but it was a long time ago, and I don't really remember.
Well, how do I find that information, guys? Because people want to know. I mean, there's so many people that are against this project, and part of the reason you're losing public trust is because there's a lack of transparency. And we're coming to you because you're the experts, the ones that want this. And so being able to access that information is critical. And every time I come to one of these meetings and ask for real data on carbon or whether or not there's been federal funding, no one has the answers, or no one's willing to give the answers. And so it's creating a lot of distrust. And, that's a shame, because then you're just such a special place and you don't want to have people, it's a shame. I think it could be resolved with some clarity and real data, which just seems to be either in a box somewhere that no one can find or just doesn't exist. It doesn't seem like the data has been collected.
Johanna, I was asking for questions related to the scope of Patrick's presentation. That's where we're at right now. I'm going to turn it over. Turn it over to Ellen right now. I understand there's intersections but we'll get to that later in the meeting. I want to focus on the Woodwell presentation at the moment. Ellen.
Real quick, one, I've sent you a note, Dan, but if what I heard was when Bob Woodruff spoke to kind of write up a review of some of the highlights of what makes the significant points that if he writes such a review, I'm not on the committee. Is it possible for us who are here now to get a copy of that in addition to where else he might send it, and also to Pat's slides? Pat, are you willing to share your slides?
Sure.
So I'm done. Thanks a lot.
And I'll make the presentations, we recorded this, so we'll make sure that those are available. And if there's, a kind of a synopsis report as well, we can link that. Also, Caitlin, I want to just cover a couple of things and then we'll get to you because I know we'll lose DCR at 10 o'clock. But know that I've seen your hand. Kendra, if you don't mind, I can update a little bit on the shared use path repaving.
Sure. Yeah.
We're working with DCR to use some of the earmark that we received for some interim repairs for the path. Sorry if I've already updated on this in previous meetings, but we're working through an MOU of sorts that would allow, some of the money to be kind of funneled toward that while the planning and design work takes place with DCR and at the moment with DOT. So this would be an asphalt sealer that the superintendent would be able to use to, kind of seal some of the cracks 4 inches and under. It wouldn't cover all of them, but the lion's share of them are 4 inches or less. At a bicycle pedestrian advisory committee meeting last night, there was a lot of enthusiasm, definitely some interest from the volunteers if they can, in prepping those sites, get rolling up their sleeves and, using a flathead screwdriver to remove the soil there before staff comes along with the sealer. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I know we're working through just the kind of mechanics of that, but there was definitely a lot of excitement on the island by the frequent flyers who use those paths, routinely, along with commuters to and from school and other sites on the island. So that's been a positive. I've been happy to be part of that development, and thanks, Kendra, for working through with your team on what it's going to take to get that into your hands. And I think it'll sync up well with Connor's return, the superintendent Connor Laffey, his return from paternity leave as well, and springtime, when the material can actually bind and the weather cooperates. Any questions on the shared use path? All right. Why don't we, I know we don't really have an update on the home site residents, so why don't we, I'll turn it over to you, Kendra, for an update on the white pine removal and restoration project.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So DCR issued a request for qualifications bid for the first phase of the project. I know that we've talked about this a lot, so I won't go into the excruciating details, but we know that phase 1 is about a 52-acre project, broken up into two different chunks, a 12-acre and a 40-acre. The plan is there will be a site walk with potential bidders, I think, in a couple of weeks. This is all posted in the request for bids that goes up on Combines, which we have to put things through in the central register. So there'll be an on-site bid site walk. We are also reaching out to and notifying the sawyers on the island and have provided their contact information as part of the bid package so that potential bidders could get in touch with them and make arrangements for keeping some of the felled wood on the island. We put into the package that at least 25% should remain on island, and then that will be worked out between the successful contractor and the Sawyers. And then the goal is to have a notice to proceed in February, so that the notice to proceed basically gives the contractors the ability to start planning for the work.
Get a copy of the bid sheet.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, did you have I don't think she heard you.
Where can I get a copy of the bid sheet?
The bid package?
Mm-hmm.
So that should be on Combines. I can see if I can get you the link to that. So it's the state system for advertising procurement. So Dan, we could send that to you. Would that be helpful if we sent it to you and then it could be shared out to the task force?
Yeah, that's fine, and I can put it on our website for others who are interested as well. Sure. Caitlin, thanks for being patient. Go ahead.
Did we ever decide how many truckloads of chips were going to go off island? Like how many tons, or is that in the procurement or the?
So the goal is for 25% of the felled wood to remain on island. I don't know if we've got an estimate in the actual spec of how much that would mean is coming off in terms of chips. I'd have to go and look in the spec.
But you do have numbers now of like it's 147 trips off island or something like that, or?
No, I don't believe that's what we would include in the spec, but let me go back and look, because the spec is more of what is the scope that we're looking to do. We tend to, and this is just general procurement, we only sort of specifically spell out the method of it if there are particular components of that method that we are very interested in how it's done. We're not going to tell a contractor how many loads that they're going to take. We're going to tell them what we need them to do, and then they have to figure out by their methods how that will get done.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I have some other questions, but they don't really apply to what we're on right now, so I'll just wait. Okay.
So this is our chance for public comment, and if we could keep things to 90 seconds or so, just to try to cover as many people as possible. You can go ahead again, Caitlin, and then I see Megan Tan.
Okay, okay, I don't really know how to frame this into a question, but I was thinking when Patrick was talking about the fire lanes and the environment in there and how come there's so many rare species and like the species have declined, the biodiversity has declined, I guess across the island. You weren't just monitoring in the state forest, but it was in other places too. Maybe on private lands. I don't really know. But I was wondering how much, the fact that there's so many ticks now and everybody's spraying insecticides or whatever, herbal insecticides, but, permethrin probably all over the place, all over the island. And then there's just a lot more light intrusion and noise. Like, how much of a factor is that just because, like, the state forest is sort of buffered by the white pine and it doesn't have, as much light and noise and obviously no permethrin? I couldn't really formulate that in a question. I just wondered if you thought about those other factors and how important they are and what's their weight. Anyway.
Sure. Well, I mean, briefly, I'll say that all of those, the vast majority of those plots were in conservation areas on the island. So I think a few of them were private, but the vast majority were in, owned by different conservation organizations, whether, DCR or like Sheriff's Meadow, Nature Conservancy, trustees, Vineyard Land Bank, like a lot of different organizations. So, the idea was that all of these plots were in places that theoretically haven't really been affected much by human activities like that. They're kind of deep in these conservation areas. So, I can't comment necessarily directly on the influence of, you know, things like insecticides and whatnot on potential declines in biodiversity. But I'll say that about where, you know, where the plots are.
Chris, you had something to add? And I just wanted to
I
thank
would just
Kendra
think
and
that, you know, yeah, I just,
I
sorry,
realized,
there's
sorry,
background noise. I'm
just real
sitting in
quick.
the airport. But yeah,
Sorry,
no,
Chris, I just
the
wanted to
point
thank
is
Kendra.
oh, okay, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I
No,
know we're
there's
going
not
to lose
there are not a
Kendra
lot of
and
mechanistic
Jake.
links between things like, you know, insecticides and plants. I mean, you need to have an effect. You really have to have some mechanistic link between why applying permethrin in some yard hundreds of meters away from these plots would end up affecting these things. There's no evidence that we can find in the literature that that would have an influence on plant diversity.
I guess I was talking more about insect diversity, you know, and insect diversity actually does affect the plants because they don't get pollinated and, whatever. But
well, insect diversity and the global decline. So we're showing this sort of island-wide decline in plants. There's a huge concern right now about island-wide or global-wide declines in insects, this insect apocalypse. People talk about it. It's very real. It just plays out differently in different places with different interfaces between human and very natural habitats and in agriculture and everything else. So it's an extremely complicated thing to nail down and would require a lot more work to make that mechanistic link in a place like Martha's Vineyard. I guess that's what I would say.
I guess I was noticing like this summer that I have a bunch of swallows that come back every year, and they didn't stick around this year, and many of them were dying from something. So
birds that eat flying insects globally are in trouble.
Yeah.
So I know we're at our hour, but wanted to give you a chance, Megan, to add something if you had something quick you wanted to contribute.
Well, I actually had some questions, just a couple. Really, the main one is based, I think, on what Kendra was saying. Is anybody there still from DCR?
No, they have a 10 o'clock meeting, so they're no longer with us.
Wonderful. Well, the point is, I wanted to know, how does DCR avoid the commercial aspect of harvesting in a forest reserve? And I'm sure they know how to do that. And I bet you know too, Dan. I don't want to take everybody's time, but I'd like to know if that has been addressed, because I think that's important. And then the other thing.
Procurement-wise?
Pardon?
Procurement-wise?
Well, just my understanding, that's why I wish someone from DCR was here. So I'll just let this go and I'll find out directly from DCR, because I don't think anybody's going to be able to answer it substantially. But I just my comment is, I'm really appreciative that you brought Pat from Woodwell, and I appreciate a lot of what I've heard today. The thing that is very important to me and many other people on the vineyard and in the country is, about the democratic process and transparency and engagement, which is what MIPA is all about, public engagement. Mm-hmm. So I'm just hopeful. And again, nobody from the States there, so I'm really not saying this to the right audience. But as Ben, pointed out early on, to have stakeholders as part of this internal DCR committee seems to be something that should happen. And I know when California got together to deal with the aftermath of the LA County fires, they brought insurance people into the committee. They brought opposition. There are different ways to create a task force, a committee. And I'm hopeful that DCR will be open-minded about that and consider engaging some of us stakeholders who have been opposed to aspects of this plan. So I don't know, Dan, could you convey that?
I mean, I think there is a public involvement piece to this
I'm
plan.
saying on
That's
the
what I
internal
heard.
committee. I'm saying on that committee that Peter was talking about, where people from conservation organizations will be on it, fire people will be on it. I think stakeholders should also be on it. That's what I'm asking you to query about that, please. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, I can make sure that that was part of the meeting summary and that they're aware of the interest level.
Whatever. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Patrick, Chris, thank you again for joining us today and for the time that went into that presentation. We look forward to trying to showcase it some more and make sure that it's, available and accessible to folks. Some really good information in there. Appreciate that.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Nice to see everybody.
Thanks again, Pat.
Okay.
And Chris.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now. Oh, it is something in